Lorraine Mitchell walked through the familiar sliding doors of St. Mary's Hospital, breathing in the antiseptic air that had been her second home for the past 12 years. The morning light filtered through the windows, casting long shadows across the polished floors. She exchanged warm smiles with Mrs. Peterson, an elderly patient who was taking her morning walk with her four-pole, and waved to Tom, the janitor who always had a kind word for everyone. As she made her way to the nurse's station, something felt different. The usual morning bustle seemed tainted with an underlying tension. Sarah, one of the younger nurses, was hunched over a patient's chart, her face pale and worried. "Everything okay?" Lorraine asked, setting down her coffee. Sarah glanced around before whispering, "Mr. Rodriguez in 412. They administered the wrong dosage last night. Dr. Matthews is trying to keep it quiet, but..." Lorraine's heart dropped. She knew Mr. Rodriguez, a kind-hearted grandfather who had been admitted for routine cardiac monitoring. Quickly pulling up his chart on the computer, her eyes widened at the numbers. The dosage was nearly double what it should have been. This wasn't just a minor oversight. It was dangerous negligence. Her hands trembled as she printed the records. This wasn't the first time she'd noticed discrepancies in Dr. Matthews' department, but it was certainly the most severe. Taking a deep breath, she straightened her scrubs and headed toward his office. The walk felt like miles. Colleagues watched her pass, their faces a mixture of concern and relief that it wasn't them making this walk. Dr. Matthews' secretary tried to stop her, but Lorraine pushed past, knocking firmly on the heavy wooden door. "Come in," his voice boomed. Dr. Matthews sat behind his massive desk, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his tie immaculate. He barely looked up from his computer screen. "Dr. Matthews, we need to discuss Mr. Rodriguez's case," Lorraine said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Ah, Nurse Mitchell, always the vigilant one." His tone was dismissive. "That matter has been handled." Handled? The wrong dosage could have killed him. This needs to be reported. His face hardened. "Are you questioning my judgment?" "I'm questioning the safety protocols that were clearly ignored. This isn't the first time, Dash." "Enough!" He stood up, towering over his desk. "Your concerns have been noted. Now, if you'll excuse me, Dash." "No," Lorraine said firmly. "Either we address this properly, or I'll take it to the board myself." The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Matthews reached for his phone, pressed a button. "Security, please escort Nurse Mitchell out. She's no longer employed here." Everything after that became a blur. Security arriving, colleagues averting their eyes, the walk to her locker. 12 years of memories, reduced to a cardboard box. Photos of recovered patients, thank you cards, her favorite coffee mug, all hastily packed away while a guard waited impatiently. The morning sun felt harsh as she stepped outside, the box heavy in her arms. Pedestrians rushed past, absorbed in their own worlds, none noticing the woman whose life had just imploded. She found herself walking aimlessly, eventually settling on a park bench across from the hospital. Looking down at the box in her lap, a photo caught her eye. Her first day as a nurse, full of hope and determination. A tear finally escaped, landing on the glossy surface. "Rough day." Lorraine looked up startled. A man stood nearby, his clothes worn and wrinkled, but his eyes kind and surprisingly alert. In any other circumstance, she might have ignored him, assuming he was just another homeless person asking for money. But something in his gentle expression made her pause. "You could say that," she managed. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, gesturing to the empty space on the bench. Without waiting for an answer, he sat down. "I'm Jeffrey, by the way, and sometimes the worst days are just beginnings in disguise." "There's something you need to see," Jeffrey said, rising from the bench with a mysterious glint in his eye. Lorraine hesitated, clutching her box of belongings closer. The rational part of her mind screamed about the dangers of following strangers, especially on a day when her judgment already felt compromised. But there was something in Jeffrey's demeanor that defied her usual caution, a quiet confidence that seemed at odds with his disheveled appearance. "I really should be going," she said, but made no move to stand. "To where?" Jeffrey asked softly, the question hitting her like a physical blow. She had no answer. Her apartment felt too empty, too final. Her friends were all at the hospital, probably already whispering about her dramatic exit. "Sometimes," Jeffrey continued, his voice carrying a hint of authority she hadn't noticed before, "we need to step completely off our path to find the right one." A group of hospital staff walked past, their scrubs a painful reminder of what she'd lost. Among them was Sarah, who quickly looked away when their eyes met. The betrayal stung more than Lorraine expected. "What exactly do you want to show me?" she asked, surprising herself with the question. Jeffrey smiled, and for a moment his entire demeanor shifted. The slouch in his shoulders disappeared, replaced by an almost scholarly posture, something that might help you understand why today happened the way it did. Against every conventional warning she'd ever heard, Lorraine found herself standing. Her box of belongings felt lighter somehow, less like a burden and more like a reminder of her principles. The same principles that had cost her her job. "Lead the way," she said, taking her first step into uncertainty. Jeffrey guided her away from the hospital district, past the busy main streets where lawyers and business people rushed to lunch meetings. They turned down quieter side streets, where small cafes and boutiques replaced corporate buildings. With each block, Lorraine felt the weight of her morning's confrontation begin to shift, transforming from a crushing defeat into something else, something she couldn't quite name yet. "Almost there," Jeffrey said as they approached a small, unmarked door between a bookstore and what appeared to be an antique shop. "After you." As Lorraine stepped to the door, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into more than just a building. She was walking into the next chapter of her life, one that had begun with a single act of defiance in a hospital administrator's office. The door closed behind them with a soft click that sounded remarkably like certainty. The morning sun cast long shadows through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the newly renovated clinic. Lorraine stood in the reception area, taking in the fresh paint smell and modern furnishings that would soon welcome their first patients. The space felt both professional and comforting, exactly what Jeffrey had envisioned for traumatized healthcare workers seeking solace. "Ready for this?" Jeffrey appeared beside her, straightening his tie with a gentle smile. The clinic's doors opened precisely at 9 a.m. Their first patient, a young resident from Memorial Hospital, walked in hesitantly. Her eyes darted around the room, much like Lorraine's had done that fateful day when she'd lost her job. The difference was that here, understanding and healing awaited. "Welcome to Safe Harbor Clinic." Lorraine greeted her warmly. "I'm Lorraine, and I'll be your primary counselor." Throughout the morning, more healthcare professionals arrived, nurses, doctors, technicians, each carrying their own burden of trauma from workplace experiences. Lorraine noticed how they all shared that same look, a mixture of defeat and desperate hope. Jeffrey gathered the entire staff for a brief meeting before lunch. "What we're doing here is revolutionary," he announced to the assembled team of counselors and support staff. "We're not just treating individuals. We're changing the culture of healthcare itself." Lorraine watched as her new colleagues nodded in agreement. The team Jeffrey had assembled was exceptional, each member carefully chosen for their combination of professional expertise and personal experience with healthcare trauma. Breaking news flashed across the wall-mounted TV in the break room. Former hospital administrator Dr. Matthews sentenced to 15 years. Lorraine felt a complex mix of emotions as she watched her former boss being led away in handcuffs. The investigation had revealed a network of negligence that spanned 5 hospitals and involved dozens of administrators. "Your testimony made this possible," Stewart commented, joining her by the TV. "But more importantly, it's making this possible." He gestured to the clinic around them. The afternoon brought the implementation of their innovative treatment protocols. Lorraine led her first group therapy session, focusing on the unique challenges faced by healthcare workers who'd witnessed or reported negligence. The energy in the room was palpable as participants realized they weren't alone in their experiences. "I thought I was the only one," confessed a surgical nurse, wiping tears from her eyes. "I never thought I'd find others who understood." As word spread about the clinic's mission, requests for consultations began pouring in from other hospitals. Jeffrey had anticipated this, already having prepared a comprehensive training program for healthcare institutions wanting to improve their support systems for staff. Lorraine found herself training new counselors, sharing her experiences both as a nurse and as someone who had stood up against systemic negligence. The perspective she gained from both sides of the equation proved invaluable in helping others navigate similar situations. "Your story gives them hope," Jeffrey told her after observing one of her training sessions. "You're living proof that speaking up, despite the consequences, can lead to positive change." By late afternoon, Lorraine was reviewing patient files in her new office when a familiar face appeared at her door. Sarah, a nurse who had worked with her at her former hospital. "I heard what you did," Sarah said quietly, "and I need help." The cycle of healing was completing itself. Those who had been hurt were becoming healers themselves, creating a ripple effect of positive change throughout the healthcare community. During the end-of-day staff meeting, Jeffrey announced plans for expanding the clinic services. "We've already received funding for 2 more locations," he revealed. "What we're doing here is just the beginning." As the sun set, Lorraine stood by the window of her office, watching new patients still arriving for evening sessions. The sight of medical professionals seeking help, no longer hiding their pain or shame, filled her with profound satisfaction. The clinic had become more than just a workplace. It was a sanctuary for those who had dedicated their lives to helping others and now needed help themselves. Earlier that day, a reporter had asked her if losing her job had been worth it. Looking at what they had built, at the lives they were already changing, Lorraine knew the answer without hesitation. As she watched another group of healthcare workers enter the clinic, their shoulders slightly straighter after passing through the doors, she smiled. As she observed new patients arriving, Lorraine realized that sometimes you have to lose everything to find your true purpose. The evening brought a different energy to the clinic, with the soft lighting creating an intimate atmosphere for the night sessions. A small group of emergency room doctors had gathered for their first support meeting, their scrubs still on from their shifts. Lorraine moved between rooms, checking on different sessions and ensuring everything ran smoothly. In one room, a trauma surgeon was sharing his story of losing a patient due to administrative pressure to rush procedures. In another, a group of nurses discussed the emotional toll of working in understaffed conditions. "This is exactly what I envisioned," Jeffrey said, joining Lorraine in the observation room. "A place where healing isn't just physical, but emotional and spiritual too." The clinic's innovative approach was already showing results. Patients who had attended morning sessions were leaving with visible relief on their faces, some even scheduling follow-up appointments before departing. The wall of testimonials near the entrance was beginning to fill with anonymous notes of gratitude. As the evening wore on, Lorraine led a final session focusing on burnout prevention. The participants, a mix of veteran and young healthcare workers, shared their strategies for maintaining compassion while protecting their own mental health. "I never thought I'd be on this side of care," admitted an oncology nurse. "But being here, sharing these experiences, it's changing how I view myself and my work." The security team did their final rounds as the last patients left for the night. Lorraine gathered her things, feeling exhausted but fulfilled. The day's events had confirmed what she had suspected all along, that there was a desperate need for this kind of support in the healthcare community. Jeffrey caught up with her in the parking lot. "Tomorrow we start planning the expansion," he said, his eyes bright with enthusiasm despite the late hour. The board was impressed with today's turnout. Lorraine nodded, knowing that this was just the beginning of something much bigger than herself. The lights of the clinic glowed behind them, a beacon of hope in the darkness, promising a new day and new possibilities for those who had dedicated their lives to healing others. She took one last look at the building before getting into her car. The sign above the entrance read, "Safe Harbor Clinic, healing those who heal others." It was more than just a tagline. It was a promise, one that Lorraine intended to keep. As she drove home under the starlit sky, Lorraine reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the moment she stood up to Dr. Matthews, through the investigation, and now to this new beginning, every step had led to this purpose. She smiled, knowing tomorrow would bring new challenges, new stories, and new opportunities to make a difference. The city lights twinkled in her rearview mirror, reminding her of all the healthcare workers still out there, working their shifts, facing their own battles. But now they had somewhere to turn, somewhere to find understanding and support. The cycle of healing would continue, growing stronger with each passing day. Following Jeffrey through the winding streets of downtown, Lorraine couldn't shake the feeling that she was making a terrible mistake. Yet something about his gentle demeanor and thoughtful eyes made her trust him, despite her rational mind screaming otherwise. They walked in comfortable silence, leaving behind the bustling main streets for quieter alleys lined with old brick buildings. Jeffrey moved with surprising grace for someone who appeared homeless, leading her to a small, hidden cafe tucked between a bookstore and an antique shop. The establishment's worn facade concealed a warm, inviting interior that smelled of fresh coffee and baked goods. "This is my favorite spot in the city," Jeffrey said, holding the door open for her. "Not many people know about it." The cafe was sparsely populated, with just a few patrons scattered among mismatched vintage furniture. Lorraine noticed a well-dressed man in a sharp gray suit watching them from a corner table, his presence somehow incongruous with the cafe's bohemian atmosphere. They settled into a cozy nook by a window, and Jeffrey ordered coffee for both of them with an eloquence that caught Lorraine off guard. His vocabulary and manner of speaking seemed at odds with his weathered appearance. "Tell me more about what happened at the hospital," he said, stirring his coffee with careful precision. "What made you take such a bold stand?" Lorraine found herself opening up about the incident, describing the systematic negligence she had witnessed and her growing frustration with the administration's disregard for patient safety. Jeffrey listened intently, asking surprisingly specific questions about hospital protocols and medical procedures. "It's interesting," he mused, "how often the system fails those who try to protect it." His comment carried a weight that made Lorraine look at him more closely. More well-dressed individuals began filtering into the cafe, each casting subtle glances in their direction. Jeffrey's phone buzzed, and he checked it with a practiced discretion that seemed out of place for someone supposedly living on the streets. "You know," Lorraine said, leaning forward, "you're not quite what you appear to be, are you?" Before Jeffrey could respond, his demeanor shifted slightly as he received another message. The man in the gray suit, Stewart, as Lorraine would soon learn, approached their table with measured steps. "I've noticed you use medical terminology with remarkable accuracy," Lorraine continued, her suspicion growing. "And you seem to know an awful lot about hospital administration." Jeffrey's eyes sparkled with intelligence as he revealed, "I know about your research paper on emergency room efficiency from 3 years ago. Quite impressive work." Lorraine felt her heart skip a beat. That paper had been published in a specialized journal under her maiden name. The mysterious man who had appeared as a homeless person just hours ago was clearly something else entirely. Stewart moved closer, now standing at the edge of their table. Jeffrey checked his phone one final time and stood up with fluid grace, all traces of his earlier homeless persona vanishing in an instant. "Sometimes," Jeffrey said, "we need to look beyond appearances to find truth." With those words, he moved to the cafe and disappeared through a back door, leaving Lorraine alone with Stewart. The well-dressed man took Jeffrey's vacant seat, reaching into his jacket pocket. Lorraine watched, her mind racing to process the bizarre turn of events as Stewart produced an elegant business card and placed it on the table between them. "Tomorrow, 9 a.m. There's something we need to discuss about your future." Lorraine picked up the card, its heavy cardstock feeling expensive between her fingers. The embossed text caught the light. "Stewart Montgomery, Executive Director, the Phoenix Institute." Below that was an address in the city's financial district. "What exactly is this about?" she asked, but Stewart was already standing, straightening his suit jacket with practiced precision. "All will be explained tomorrow," he said. "And Ms. Walker, I suggest you come. It's about much more than just your dismissal from the hospital." Lorraine watched Stewart leave, his polished shoes clicking against the wooden floor. Other well-dressed patrons began leaving too, like actors exiting a stage after a performance. Within minutes, the cafe returned to its quiet, bohemian atmosphere, as if the strange interlude had never happened. She stayed at the table, turning the business card over and over in her hands. The events of the day seemed surreal. From being escorted out of the hospital to meeting Jeffrey, who had transformed from a seemingly homeless man into someone clearly involved in whatever this was. The barista brought her another coffee, mentioning it had been paid for. When Lorraine tried to ask about Jeffrey, the young woman just smiled knowingly and walked away. Using her phone, Lorraine searched for the Phoenix Institute. The results were vague. A privately funded research organization focusing on healthcare and social initiatives. Nothing about Jeffrey. Nothing about Stewart. Just a professional website with carefully worded mission statements and stock photos of medical professionals. As the afternoon light began to fade outside the cafe window, Lorraine gathered her belongings, including the box of personal items from her hospital locker that now seemed like artifacts from a different life. She stepped out into the cooling evening air, the business card secure in her pocket, weighing as heavily as the decisions ahead of her. The quiet side street looked different now, transformed from a hidden passage into what felt like a threshold between her old life and whatever awaited her tomorrow at 9 a.m. She checked the address one more time, memorizing it, knowing that despite her reservations, she would go. After all, she had already lost her job. What more did she have to lose? What she didn't notice as she walked away was a security camera above the cafe store, its lens following her departure, or the discreet figure in the window of the building opposite, speaking quietly into a phone, confirming that everything had gone according to plan. Lorraine stood at the entrance of the glass-fronted building, her reflection distorted in the mirrored panels that stretched toward the sky. Her hand clutched Stewart's business card, now creased from being held too tightly. The address matched, but something about the building's grandeur made her hesitate. This was a far cry from the modest cafe where she had met Jeffrey yesterday. Taking a deep breath, she pushed through the revolving doors into a marble-floored lobby. The receptionist, a polished woman in her 40s, looked up immediately and smiled with unexpected warmth. "Ms. Lorraine Bennett, we've been expecting you. Please, take the executive elevator to the top floor." The words executive elevator echoed in Lorraine's mind as she walked across the lobby, her footsteps echoing against the marble. The elevator doors were burnished bronze, and inside, soft classical music played as she ascended. Each floor number that lit up increased her apprehension. When the doors opened on the top floor, Stewart was waiting, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly salary, her former salary. She reminded herself bitterly. "Thank you for coming, Lorraine," he said, guiding her through glass doors into a corner office with panoramic views of the city. "I imagine you have questions." The office walls told a story she wasn't prepared for. Framed photographs showed Jeffrey, not the disheveled man from the street, but a distinguished figure in academic regalia, speaking at conferences, receiving awards. In one photo, he stood shoulder to shoulder with leading figures in psychology, his presence commanding and professional. "Who is he really?" Lorraine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Stewart gestured for her to sit in one of the leather chairs, facing a massive desk. "Dr. Jeffrey Thorne is one of the country's leading social psychologists, specializing in empathy studies and healthcare ethics. What you experienced yesterday was part of a carefully designed social experiment." The words hit her like a physical blow. "An experiment?" Heat rose to her cheeks. "You mean I was manipulated? Studied?" "Please let me explain," Stewart said, reaching for a remote control. A large screen descended from the ceiling, and footage began to play. Lorraine watched herself on the bench yesterday, tears barely contained, and Jeffrey approaching with that disarming smile. We've been conducting a series of interactions with healthcare professionals who faced ethical dilemmas in their workplace. Your confrontation with your superior at the hospital caught our attention. More footage played, showing different angles of their conversation. The cafe hadn't been random. It was equipped with hidden cameras. Lorraine felt her stomach churn. "This is violation of privacy," she started, but Stewart raised his hand. "Everything was conducted under strict ethical guidelines approved by our Institutional Review Board. We're prepared to share all documentation with you." The door opened and Jeffrey walked in, transformed from the street person she'd met into the distinguished academic from the photos. His suit was perfectly tailored, his hair neatly styled, but his eyes held the same kindness she'd noticed yesterday. "Lorraine," he said, "I owe you an apology for the deception, but not for the conversation we had. Everything I said about the importance of ethical healthcare was genuine." She stood, anger and fascination warring inside her. Why me? Why this elaborate setup? Jeffrey sat on the edge of the desk, his posture open and earnest. "Because we needed to understand how healthcare professionals react to ethical challenges when they think no one is watching. Your response, your genuine empathy and unwavering principles, was exactly what we were hoping to find." Stewart began laying out documents on the desk, charts, graphs, research papers. "We've been studying patterns of ethical decision-making in healthcare settings. Your former hospital has been of particular interest to us." Lorraine's attention snapped to Stewart. "What do you mean?" Jeffrey exchanged a look with Stewart before turning back to her. "We're building something, Lorraine. Something that could change how healthcare institutions handle ethical challenges. But we need people like you, people who won't back down when they see something wrong." As she processed this information, trying to reconcile her anger at being deceived with her growing curiosity about their work, Jeffrey reached for a folder on his desk. "Your ex-boss isn't who you think he is," Jeffrey said, opening a folder filled with confidential documents. The documents spread across the desk revealed a pattern that made Lorraine's blood run cold. Photographs of Dr. Matthews at private meetings, spreadsheets showing suspicious patterns in patient care, and internal memos that contradicted the hospital's public statements about quality of care. "These meetings," Lorraine said, pointing to a particular photo, "they happen every Thursday afternoon. He always said they were donor meetings." "They were meetings with pharmaceutical representatives," Jeffrey explained, discussing ways to maximize profits through unnecessary treatments and extended hospital stays. Stewart pulled out another set of documents. "Your confrontation with him wasn't the first time someone raised concerns. Over the past 3 years, 7 other medical professionals have been terminated after questioning similar practices." Lorraine sank back into her chair, memories flooding back. The patient who'd been kept on expensive medications longer than necessary. The unnecessary tests that seemed to multiply with certain insurance providers. The subtle pressure to maintain occupancy rates in specific wards. Jeffrey spread the documents across the mahogany conference table, his demeanor shifting from apologetic to intensely focused. Lorraine leaned forward, her eyes widening as she recognized familiar names and patterns in the paperwork before her. "What you experienced at the hospital wasn't an isolated incident," Jeffrey explained, pointing to a series of incident reports. "We've been tracking systematic negligence cases for the past 18 months. Lorraine's hands trembled as she picked up a photograph showing Dr. Matthews in what appeared to be a clandestine meeting with several other hospital administrators. The timestamp showed it was taken just 3 weeks ago. "These are all connected?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Stewart stepped forward, adjusting his tie. "We've documented 37 cases of serious negligence that were deliberately covered up. Your confrontation with Dr. Matthews was the latest in a long pattern." More documents revealed testimonies from former employees, nurses, technicians, even junior doctors, all dismissed under similar circumstances. Lorraine recognized several names, colleagues who had mysteriously disappeared from the hospital corridors over the past year. Sarah Jenkins, she murmured, touching one particular file. She tried to report a medication error last spring. They said she resigned for personal reasons. Jeffrey nodded grimly. Sarah's case was what initially caught our attention, but it goes deeper than that. He pulled out another folder, this one marked with red tabs. I have a personal stake in this investigation. For the first time since their meeting began, Jeffrey's professional facade cracked slightly. He shared his own story. How his wife had died 3 years ago due to a preventable medical error, one that was subsequently buried under layers of bureaucracy and denial. That's why I started this project, he explained, gesturing to the modern office space around them. We're not just investigating negligence. We're creating something new, a clinic specifically designed to address trauma and healing in healthcare professionals. Stewart began introducing other members of the investigation team, legal experts, medical researchers, and former healthcare professionals who had joined their cause. Each brought their own expertise and perspective to the growing case against the hospital administration. Lorraine found herself overwhelmed by the scope of what she was seeing. How many others have you tested like me? She asked, thinking back to their first meeting. You were the 7th, Jeffrey admitted. But you're the first who showed exactly the kind of empathy and courage we're looking for. Your reaction to finding a stranger in need, even in your moment of crisis, was genuine. The team presented their plans for the new clinic, a revolutionary approach to healthcare that would prioritize both patient care and provider well-being. It would serve as a model for systematic change in medical institutions. As Lorraine studied the proposal, her initial anger at being manipulated began to transform into understanding. The deception had served a greater purpose, one that could potentially save countless lives and careers. Jeffrey laid out the risks of joining their investigation. Dr. Matthews has powerful friends. This won't be easy, and there will be pushback. We need to know you're prepared for what might come. Before Lorraine could respond, Stewart's phone buzzed urgently on the table. Dr. Matthews just scheduled a press conference for tomorrow. The room's atmosphere immediately tensed. Stewart quickly pulled up his tablet, showing a hastily posted press release from the hospital's public relations department. He's trying to get ahead of this, Jeffrey said, his jaw tightening. We need to move faster than planned. Lorraine watched as the team sprang into action. Legal documents were organized, evidence was cataloged, and phone calls were made in rapid succession. She found herself drawn to a wall of photographs. Faces of healthcare workers who had tried to stand up against the system and paid the price. These people, she said, touching one of the frames. What happened to them? Some left healthcare entirely, Stewart explained, joining her at the wall. Others took positions at smaller facilities, often several states away. The system has a way of blacklisting whistleblowers. Jeffrey approached with a thick folder labeled Surgical Protocol Violations 2021 to 2023. This is why we need someone like you, Lorraine. Someone who understands both the medical aspects and the human cost. The evidence was damning. Falsified records, altered patient charts, deliberately misleading documentation about adverse events. Each page revealed another layer of systematic corruption that had become endemic within the hospital's operations. I should have seen it sooner, Lorraine whispered, recognizing patterns and incidents she had witnessed but hadn't connected before. That's how they operate, Jeffrey explained. They keep everything compartmentalized. Each incident appears isolated until you step back and see the full picture. Stewart brought over a contract and placed it before Lorraine. This is a formal invitation to join our investigation team. Full protection, legal coverage, and a position at the new clinic once we go public. Lorraine stared at the document, her mind racing through the implications. Her signature would mean no turning back, no quiet retreat to another hospital position. This was bigger than her career. It was about fundamental change in a broken system. The phone on the conference table rang, cutting through the tension. Stewart answered, his expression growing more concerned with each passing second. After hanging up, he turned to the group. Dr. Matthews just called for a press conference tomorrow at 10 a.m. He says he has shocking revelations about a conspiracy against the hospital. Lorraine sat in Jeffrey's office, her fingers drumming nervously on the polished mahogany table as Stewart burst through the door. Matthews just scheduled a press conference for tomorrow, he announced, his usually composed demeanor showing cracks of concern. Jeffrey immediately sprang into action, pulling files from his cabinet while instructing his team through the speakerphone. Get all the documentation ready, every single case, every piece of evidence we have. His voice carried the weight of years of preparation for this moment. Lorraine watched as the office transformed into a war room. Boxes of medical records were brought in, and laptops displayed spreadsheets of incidents dating back years. Her own termination paperwork lay among them, a small piece in a much larger puzzle. Lorraine, Jeffrey turned to her, his eyes serious. This is where everything changes. Matthews will try to discredit our investigation, paint it as a conspiracy against the hospital. We need your help, but you need to understand the risks. Stewart laid out a series of documents on the table. Once you're publicly involved, there's no going back. Matthews has powerful friends, and they won't hesitate to retaliate. Memories flooded Lorraine's mind. The elderly patient who received the wrong medication dosage, the young mother whose symptoms were dismissed until it was almost too late, the countless near misses that were swept under the rug. Each memory strengthened her resolve. 3 other former hospital employees joined them, their faces familiar to Lorraine. Sarah from pediatrics, who'd been fired last year. Marcus from emergency, who'd resigned after questioning protocol violations. They shared their stories, each one a thread in the tapestry of systematic negligence. Jeffrey revealed more of his personal story as they prepared. 20 years ago, I lost my sister to medical negligence, he said quietly. The hospital covered it up, just like Matthews is doing now. That's why this clinic, this investigation, it's about breaking the cycle. Lorraine's hands trembled as she reviewed her own detailed records. For years, she'd documented everything, never knowing it would come to this. Each incident report, every email exchange with Matthews, now served as ammunition. Stewart worked with the legal team, preparing statements and responses to potential accusations. Matthews will try to paint you as disgruntled employees, he warned. We need to stay focused on the evidence. The gravity of what they were about to do settled over the room. This wasn't just about Lorraine's job anymore. It was about every patient at risk, every healthcare worker silenced by fear. You can still walk away, Jeffrey offered, placing a folder in front of her. No one would blame you. Lorraine opened the folder, finding photographs of patients she'd cared for, incident reports she'd filed, and statements from other staff members. Her entire career at the hospital laid bare, documenting not just her struggles, but her unwavering commitment to patient care. She thought about her last day at the hospital, the feeling of helplessness as security escorted her out. But now, that helplessness was replaced by something stronger, purpose. Without hesitation, Lorraine picked up the pen. Her signature on the affidavit was steady, decisive. I'm in, she said, looking Jeffrey in the eye. Whatever it takes. The team worked through the night, preparing for Matthew's press conference. They organized evidence, rehearsed statements, and anticipated every possible angle of attack. Lorraine contributed her intimate knowledge of the hospital's operations, filling in crucial gaps in their understanding. As dawn approached, exhaustion set in, but no one stopped. They knew tomorrow would change everything, for better or worse. Stewart received updates about Matthew's movements, his contacts with media outlets, his meetings with hospital board members. Jeffrey gathered them for a final briefing. Remember, he said, this isn't about revenge. It's about protecting patients and supporting healthcare workers who dare to speak up. Lorraine nodded, feeling a mix of fear and determination. Her phone buzzed with a message, her last chance to back out. She deleted it without reading it. The television in the corner flashed breaking news. Dr. Matthews promises shocking revelations about conspiracy against hospital. The news anchor's voice filled the room as everyone froze, watching Matthew's smug face on the screen. He stood at the hospital entrance, surrounded by administrators and board members, projecting confidence through his practiced smile. "We're ready for this," Jeffrey assured the team, but Lorraine noticed his hands tighten around the folder he held. His overconfidence will be his downfall. Stewart's phone rang continuously as reporters began calling for comments. The story was already spreading through social media, with hospital staff and former patients sharing their own experiences. Some defended Matthews, but many more expressed doubt and shared their own suspicious encounters. Lorraine pulled up her old emails on her laptop, each one a reminder of the battles she'd fought within the system. There was a thread about understaffing in the ICU, Matthews' dismissive responses to safety concerns, the warnings about budget cuts affecting patient care. She'd kept everything, driven by some instinct that one day it would matter. "Look at this," Sarah called out, pointing to her screen. The hospital stock was already responding to the news of the press conference, showing slight tremors that suggested investor uncertainty. Marcus organized their testimonies chronologically, creating a timeline that revealed the escalating pattern of negligence. "It's all here," he said. Years of systematic failure. Jeffrey gathered them around the conference table one last time. "Tomorrow, everything we've worked for comes to a head. Matthews thinks he's controlling the narrative, but he has no idea what we're about to reveal." Lorraine felt a strange calm settle over her. The fear was still there, but it was overshadowed by certainty. She thought of all the patients who'd suffered, all the colleagues who'd been silenced. Tomorrow, their voices would finally be heard. As the team dispersed to get a few hours of rest before the storm, Lorraine remained in the office, staring at the city lights below. She recalled her first day at the hospital, full of ideals and determination to make a difference. Tomorrow, she would make that difference in a way she'd never imagined. The television continued its coverage, the words "hospital controversy" flashing across the screen. Dr. Matthews promises shocking revelations about conspiracy against hospital. Lorraine's heart pounded as she watched the growing media circus outside the hospital's conference room. Camera crews jostled for position while reporters checked their microphones and adjusted their hair. Through the glass doors, she could see Dr. Matthews arriving, his usual confident stride now seeming almost theatrical as he straightened his tie. Jeffrey stood beside her in the shadows of the hallway, his hand gentle on her shoulder. "Remember, you don't have to speak unless you want to. We have enough evidence." The conference room buzzed with anticipation as Dr. Matthews took his place at the podium, his practiced smile gleaming under the harsh lights. Security personnel lined the walls, their faces stoic as they surveyed the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen of the press," Dr. Matthews began, his voice carrying the smooth authority that had intimidated so many staff members over the years. "I've called this conference to address a concerning conspiracy against our esteemed institution. Recent allegations have been made by disgruntled former employees, orchestrated by individuals with questionable motives." Lorraine felt her fingers curl into fists as she watched from the back of the room. Jeffrey's team was strategically positioned throughout the crowd, each member ready with documentation and evidence. "These accusations are not only false, but represent a calculated attack on our hospital's reputation," Dr. Matthews continued, his confidence growing with each word. "We have always maintained the highest standards of patient care dash." "Then how do you explain this, Dr. Matthews?" Jeffrey's voice cut through the room as he stood, holding up a thick folder. The cameras swiveled toward him as he approached the front. "We have documented evidence of systematic negligence spanning 5 years." The room erupted in questions as Jeffrey's team began distributing copies of carefully redacted reports. Dr. Matthews' smile faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered. "These documents are clearly fabricated dash, including the death certificate of Sarah Collins," another team member called out, standing. A patient who died due to an incorrectly administered medication dosage that was subsequently covered up. Lorraine watched as Dr. Matthews' facade began to crack. Sweat beaded on his forehead under the bright lights as more evidence was presented. Charts, testimonies, and internal memos appeared on the large screen behind him. The reporters were in a frenzy now, shouting questions faster than they could be answered. Dr. Matthews attempted to maintain control, but his voice had lost its authority. These allegations are baseless, Dash. I was there. Lorraine surprised herself by speaking. The words had escaped before she could stop them. The room fell silent as she walked forward, every camera turning to capture her image. I watched Sarah Collins die. I reported the negligence, and I was fired for it. Her voice grew stronger with each step toward the podium. But I wasn't the first, was I? Dr. Matthews? How many others did you silence? Other former employees began standing up throughout the room, each with their own story. The cameras swung wildly, trying to capture every new voice, every accusation. Dr. Matthews' face had turned ashen. This is outrageous, he stammered, tugging at his collar. Security. Clear the room, Dash. The security team answers to the hospital board now, Jeffrey announced calmly, and they've seen the evidence too. The conference had devolved into chaos. Reporters were shouting over each other, cameras flashing like strobe lights. Dr. Matthews looked trapped, his eyes darting between the exits as his carefully constructed world crumbled around him. Lorraine stood her ground, even as security moved to restore order. She watched as Dr. Matthews finally broke, pushing past reporters toward the exit. As he passed her, his shoulder brushed against hers roughly. This is just the beginning, Dr. Matthews whispered as he rushed past Lorraine. The chaos intensified as Dr. Matthews disappeared through the door. Reporters surged forward, their microphones thrust toward Lorraine like spears. She felt Jeffrey's steadying presence beside her as cameras flashed relentlessly. Ms. Parker, how long did the negligence continue? Were there other deaths? Did the hospital board know about these incidents? Jeffrey stepped forward, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the frenzy around them. We'll be releasing a comprehensive report detailing all incidents and evidence. For now, we ask that you respect the privacy of those who have come forward. But the momentum couldn't be contained. More former employees were speaking to reporters in corners of the room, their previously silent voices now rising above the din. Nurses, technicians, even a former resident, each with their own story of covered-up mistakes and threatened silence. Security guards formed a protective barrier around Lorraine as Stewart appeared, guiding her toward a side exit. Through the glass walls, she could see news vans arriving, their satellite dishes extending skyward like mechanical flowers reaching for the sun. You did well, Stewart murmured, leading her through a service corridor. Better than we expected. The public reaction will be overwhelming. Already, phones throughout the room were lighting up with notifications as the first social media posts went live. Hashtags were forming, stories were breaking, and the carefully maintained reputation of the hospital was unraveling in real time. In a quiet room away from the chaos, Lorraine watched the live coverage on a wall-mounted television. Dr. Matthews' hasty exit was being replayed on multiple channels, his face frozen in various stages of desperation. Below the footage, headlines scrolled, "Hospital Scandal Exposed," "Whistleblowers Reveal Years of Cover-Ups," "Medical Negligence Investigation Launches." Jeffrey joined her, loosening his tie. This will trigger investigations at other hospitals. Dr. Matthews isn't the only one who's been protecting a broken system. Lorraine nodded, her adrenaline finally starting to fade. She felt simultaneously exhausted and electrified. On the screen, her own face appeared, speaking truth to power. She hardly recognized herself. The woman on screen looked stronger, more determined than she'd ever felt. Stewart entered with his phone pressed to his ear. The hospital board is calling an emergency meeting. They're already discussing a complete administrative overhaul. He paused, listening. And Dr. Matthews has just been seen leaving the city. Through the windows, Lorraine could see the sun setting behind the hospital buildings where she'd spent so many years of her life. The familiar silhouette now seemed different, as if the truth had physically altered its appearance. "What happens now?" she asked, turning away from the window. Jeffrey's reply was interrupted by a commotion in the hallway. A security guard rushed in, holding a sealed envelope. This was just delivered from Miss Parker. The messenger disappeared before we could question them. The envelope bore no return address, just Lorraine's name in precise mechanical typing. Inside was a single photograph. Dr. Matthews shaking hands with administrators from other hospitals, all smiling at some private joke. The date stamp showed it was taken just last week. "This is just the beginning," Dr. Matthews had whispered, and now Lorraine understood he hadn't been threatening her. He'd been warning her about how deep this really went. The morning after the press conference, Lorraine's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Social media had exploded with the story, her name trending alongside hashtags about medical negligence and whistleblowers. She watched as clips from yesterday's confrontation played on every major news network, her own face looking back at her from the screen, determined and fierce in a way she hadn't recognized in herself before. "Turn that off," Jeffrey advised, walking into the office they'd set up as their temporary headquarters. "We need to focus on what's coming next." He placed a stack of papers on the desk between them. "These are calls from other hospitals. Their administrators want to discuss implementing new safety protocols." Stewart burst through the door, his usually composed demeanor slightly ruffled. "We need to increase security. There's been some concerning communication." He handed Jeffrey a folder containing printed emails. Lorraine caught glimpses of threatening language as Jeffrey flipped through them. "We expected this," Jeffrey said calmly, but Lorraine noticed him tightening his jaw. Double the security detail, especially around Lorraine. She's become the face of this investigation, whether we planned it or not. As if to emphasize the point, Lorraine's phone lit up with another message, this one from an unknown number, warning her to watch her back. She placed the phone face down on the desk, trying to steady her trembling hands. Throughout the day, more cases emerged. Former patients and their families began reaching out, sharing stories that painted an even darker picture of Dr. Matthews' administration. Each new revelation felt like another brick being added to a wall of evidence that couldn't be ignored. "I need to see them," Lorraine announced suddenly, standing up from her desk. "See who?" Stewart asked, looking up from his laptop. "My former patients. The ones still in the hospital. They deserve to hear the truth from me, not just from the news." Jeffrey nodded slowly. "Take Thompson with you," he said, referring to one of their security personnel. "But be careful. The hospital's still in chaos." The visit to her former workplace was surreal. Staff members either avoided her gaze or offered subtle nods of support. In the patients' rooms, however, she found purpose. Many had seen the news and welcomed her with open arms, sharing their own stories and concerns. Mrs. Rodriguez, an elderly patient she'd cared for over several months, held her hand tightly. "I always knew something wasn't right," she whispered. "Thank you for being brave enough to speak up." Back at headquarters, Jeffrey was expanding on his plans for the clinic. "We'll need a comprehensive trauma program," he explained, spreading architectural plans across the conference table. "These healthcare workers who've witnessed negligence or been forced to participate in corrupt systems, they need healing too." Stewart continued coordinating with legal teams and authorities, building an increasingly complex case that stretched beyond Dr. Matthews. "He's gone underground," Stewart reported, hanging up his phone. "But his disappearance is actually helping us. More people are coming forward now that they don't fear immediate retaliation." As evening approached, Lorraine found herself staring out the window of their office, watching the city lights flicker on. The weight of what they'd undertaken was settling on her shoulders, but instead of feeling crushed, she felt stronger. A group of investigative journalists had gathered outside the building, hoping for follow-up interviews. Among them Lorraine spotted familiar faces from national networks. Their presence confirmed what Jeffrey had been saying. This story was bigger than one hospital, bigger than one corrupt administrator. "We've got something," Stewart called out, waving a stack of papers. "Financial records showing patterns of systematic cover-ups. This goes deep into the hospital board." As they gathered around to examine the new evidence, a courier arrived with a large manila envelope. There was no return address, just Lorraine's name typed on a plain white label. Inside were photographs that made everyone in the room fall silent. In crisp color images, Dr. Matthews appeared in private meetings with hospital administrators from across the state, handling envelopes that looked suspiciously like payoffs. "This changes everything," Jeffrey whispered, spreading the photos across the table. "This isn't just about one hospital anymore. This is a network." An anonymous envelope arrived containing photos that changed everything. Dr. Matthews wasn't alone in this story. The photos revealed a pattern stretching back years. In one image, dated 3 years ago, Dr. Matthews sat at an upscale restaurant with 5 other hospital administrators, all of whom Lorraine recognized from regional medical conferences. They were passing documents across the table, their expressions serious and guarded. "Look at the timestamps," Stewart pointed out, organizing the photos chronologically. These meetings increased in frequency right after the hospital board started pushing for cost-cutting measures. Jeffrey pulled out his phone, quickly scrolling through his contacts. Some of these administrators are from hospitals that have been reporting suspiciously low incident rates. "We always thought it was odd, but now." "They were covering for each other," Lorraine finished, her voice barely above a whisper. She picked up a photo showing Dr. Matthews shaking hands with James Wilson, the CEO of Metropolitan General. "I interviewed there last year. They turned me down after checking my references with Matthews." The implications were staggering. What had started as one woman's stand against negligence in her hospital had uncovered a systematic network of corruption that potentially put thousands of patients at risk. Stewart was already on the phone with federal investigators, his voice tight with urgency. "Yes, we have photographic evidence." "No, these aren't doctored. We need to move quickly before they can destroy more records." The office buzzed with renewed energy. Team members were dispatched to secure additional evidence, while others began cross-referencing patient records from all the implicated hospitals. Patterns emerged. Similar cover-ups, identical methods of silencing whistleblowers, matching financial discrepancies. Lorraine found herself at the center of an operation far larger than she'd ever imagined. Her medical knowledge proved invaluable as they combed through records, identifying suspicious patterns in patient care and medication protocols. "We need to protect our sources," Jeffrey insisted, implementing new security measures. "These people have proven they'll go to any length to maintain their power." As night fell, the team worked tirelessly, fueled by coffee and the weight of their discovery. Security guards patrolled the building's perimeter, their presence a stark reminder of the dangers they faced. The photos had done more than expose a network of corruption. They had given them leverage. Each image was a thread that, when pulled, threatened to unravel years of carefully constructed deception. "Lorraine," Jeffrey called softly, pulling her aside. "You need to be prepared. When this breaks, it's going to be bigger than anything we've seen in healthcare fraud. Are you ready for that?" Looking at the evidence spread before them, Lorraine felt a mix of determination and purpose. She had lost her job, risked her reputation, and faced threats, but now she understood why. This wasn't just about one hospital or one administrator. This was about changing the entire system. The night stretched on as they built their case, knowing that with each passing hour, they were closer to exposing a truth that would shake the medical establishment to its core. The photos had opened a door they couldn't close. Not that any of them wanted to. The manila envelope landed on Jeffrey's desk with a soft thud, its contents spilling across the polished surface. Lorraine's breath caught as she leaned forward, her eyes scanning the photographs that scattered before them. Black and white images showed Dr. Matthews in various locations, always in the company of other suited individuals, their expressions serious and conspiratorial. These weren't taken by amateurs, Jeffrey said, picking up one of the photos. The quality was pristine, the angles professional. Someone's been watching them for months. Lorraine recognized several faces in the photos. That's Dr. Henderson from Memorial Hospital. She pointed to a gray-haired man in one image. And there's Dr. Parker from City General. They're all hospital administrators. Stewart entered the room, carrying a laptop. We've identified most of them. 15 hospital administrators from 8 different facilities across the state. All of them have had similar patterns of negligence cases that were quietly settled out of court. Jeffrey began arranging the photos on a large corkboard, connecting them with red string. Each string represented a different case, a different cover-up. The web grew more complex with each connection. It's not just about cutting corners anymore, Jeffrey said, stepping back to survey the board. This is systematic. They've been working together to hide malpractice cases, sharing strategies, protecting each other. Federal investigators arrived later that morning. Agent Sarah Chun took charge, her sharp eyes taking in the evidence wall. This matches patterns we've seen in other states. We've been building a case, but we needed concrete evidence like this. More whistleblowers came forward throughout the day. A nurse from City General, her hands shaking as she described similar incidents. An orderly from St. Luke's, his voice barely above a whisper as he detailed late-night document shredding sessions. Each story added another layer to the growing conspiracy. The pressure from the media intensified. Reporters camped outside the building, their cameras flashing whenever anyone entered or left. News vans lined the street, satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like mechanical flowers. "We're getting threats," Stewart announced during their afternoon briefing. He slid his phone across the table, showing a series of anonymous messages. "They're getting desperate." Jeffrey immediately called for increased security. Armed guards appeared at entrances and exits. Lorraine noticed cameras being installed in the parking garage. The weight of what they'd uncovered pressed down on all of them. "I need to tell you something," Jeffrey said to Lorraine later that evening, as they reviewed more documents. "This isn't the first time I've gone up against people like this." He rolled up his sleeve, revealing a long scar. 10 years ago, I was investigating a similar case in Chicago. Someone decided to send a message. That's why I understand the risks we're taking. Lorraine felt her resolve strengthen. The fear was still there, but it was overshadowed by determination. She thought of all the patients who had suffered, all the families who never got answers. "We can't back down now." Police protection was arranged for key witnesses. Lorraine found herself with a constant shadow, a detective named Martinez, who took his job very seriously. "Better safe than sorry," he said, checking her apartment before allowing her inside. The investigation expanded like ripples in a pond. Each new piece of evidence led to more connections, more players in the network. Hospital board members, insurance executives, even politicians. The web of complicity seemed endless. Stewart worked tirelessly, organizing the evidence into airtight cases. "We need everything perfect," he said, his eyes red from lack of sleep. "These people have expensive lawyers. We can't give them any wiggle room." Lorraine found herself drawing on an inner strength she didn't know she possessed. The woman who had left the hospital with a box of belongings seemed like a different person now. She worked alongside Jeffrey and the investigators, her medical knowledge proving invaluable in understanding the patterns of negligence. As they prepared for legal action, the atmosphere grew tense with anticipation. They all knew they were on the verge of exposing something massive, something that would shake the medical establishment to its core. The next morning, Lorraine arrived to find Jeffrey staring at a new message on his computer screen. His face was pale, but his eyes were determined. He looked up as she entered. Dr. Matthews reappeared with an unexpected proposal for Lorraine. The message was simple. Dr. Matthews wanted to meet. Alone, he claimed to have information that would change everything. Lorraine felt her heart race as she read the words. "It's obviously a trap," Stewart said, pacing the room. "He's desperate cornered. That makes him dangerous." Jeffrey remained silent, studying Lorraine's reaction. She could feel his eyes on her as she reread the message for the third time. The location Dr. Matthews suggested was a small coffee shop on the outskirts of town, far from the media's prying eyes. "We could wire her," Agent Chin suggested, already reaching for her phone. "Have a team in place. If he's willing to talk, this could be our chance to get direct testimony." The evidence wall loomed behind them, a testament to months of investigation. Photos, documents, connections, all pointing to a conspiracy that had cost lives and ruined careers. But direct testimony from someone at the center of it all would be invaluable. "I'll do it," Lorraine said, her voice steadier than she felt. "But I have conditions." They spent the next hour planning every detail. Agent Chen's team would secure the location hours in advance. Stewart would handle the legal implications of any recorded conversation. Jeffrey insisted on being nearby, though out of sight. As they finalized the arrangements, another whistleblower arrived. A young doctor from Memorial Hospital, his residency barely completed, brought files showing how the network had pressured staff to falsify records. "They threatened to end my career before it began," he said, hands trembling as he handed over the documents. "But after seeing what happened to other patients, I couldn't stay silent." The new evidence further confirmed what they already knew. The network's influence ran deep, affecting every level of hospital operations. Staff were silenced, records altered, families paid off, all to protect profits and reputations. Lorraine spent the evening preparing for the meeting, memorizing key details they needed to confirm. Martinez remained vigilant outside her apartment, his presence both reassuring and a reminder of the stakes involved. As she lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, Lorraine thought about her journey. From the moment she confronted Dr. Matthews about negligence to now, preparing to face him again under very different circumstances. The fear was still there, but it had transformed into something else, a determination to see justice done. Tomorrow, she would sit across from the man who had dismissed her concerns, who had been part of a system that valued profit over patient care. Tomorrow, she would wear a wire and try to get him to talk. But tonight, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of what they'd uncovered. A network of corruption that had treated human lives as mere numbers on a spreadsheet. It made her angry, and that anger would fuel her through whatever came next. Dr. Matthews had no idea that his proposal would be his undoing. The message came through Stewart's secure line at midnight. Dr. Matthews wanted to meet Lorraine alone at the old botanical gardens. Despite Jeffrey's immediate objection, Lorraine knew this might be their only chance to understand the full scope of the corruption. Dawn painted the gardens in shades of gray as Lorraine walked the gravel path, her footsteps echoing in the empty space. Dr. Matthews stood by the Victorian greenhouse, his usual polished appearance now weathered by days of hiding. His eyes darted nervously, scanning the perimeter. "You came alone?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Yes." Lorraine maintained her distance, aware of Jeffrey's team monitoring from discreet positions around the garden. Matthews pulled a thick manila envelope from his coat. "What you've uncovered is just the surface, Lorraine. There's so much more." His hands trembled as he opened the envelope, spreading photographs and documents across a stone bench. The documents revealed a web of corruption spanning decades. Hospital administrators, pharmaceutical companies, insurance providers, all connected to a complex scheme of kickbacks and covered-up negligence cases. These people, Matthews gestured to the photos, they're powerful. They can make anyone disappear, professionally or otherwise. Lorraine studied the faces in the photographs, recognizing several prominent figures in the medical community. Her stomach turned as she saw familiar names attached to death certificates, falsified records, and payoff schedules. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Matthews reached into his pocket and withdrew a check. $5 million. Enough to start a new life anywhere you want. All you have to do is walk away. The amount struck her like a physical blow. $5 million. Enough to escape, to start over, to never worry about job security again. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine that future. From her earpiece, she heard Jeffrey's steady breathing, but no words. He was letting her make this choice on her own. There was a patient, Lorraine said, her voice steady. Sarah Chun, 26 years old. She died because someone altered her chart to hide a medication error. Was that part of the scheme? Matthew's face tightened. Everything was part of the scheme, Lorraine. The system is built on it. You can't change it. You can only choose which side you're on. I already have. She stepped back, pressing the silent alarm button in her pocket. Matthew's expression hardened as police sirens wailed in the distance. He lunged for the documents, but Lorraine was faster, sweeping them into her arms and backing away. "You fool," he snarled, reaching into his jacket. Before he could withdraw whatever he was grabbing, two plainclothes officers tackled him from behind. The garden erupted with activity as Jeffrey's team emerged from their hiding spots. Matthews fought against the handcuffs, shouting threats and promises that echoed through the garden. Lorraine watched as Stewart coordinated with the police, ensuring every document was properly logged and secured. Jeffrey appeared at her side, his face etched with concern. "Are you all right?" Lorraine nodded, still clutching the documents. "We need to protect these people," she said, looking at the faces in the photographs, the ones who tried to speak up before. As Matthews was led away, he locked eyes with Lorraine one last time. "You have no idea what you've done," he spat. But she did know. Looking at Jeffrey, at the team of dedicated professionals working to expose the truth, at the evidence that would finally bring justice to countless victims, Lorraine knew exactly what she had done. The garden slowly cleared of police and investigators, the morning sun now fully risen. Stewart approached with a tablet, showing her the first news alerts about Matthew's arrest. The story was already breaking. Jeffrey placed a protective hand on her shoulder as they watched the police cars pull away. In the distance, more reporters were arriving, drawn by the commotion. "Now we can begin the real work," said Jeffrey, opening the doors to the new clinic. The sound of camera shutters and shouting reporters grew louder as Jeffrey guided Lorraine through the side entrance of the clinic. Inside, the contrast was striking, peaceful, sterile, and filled with purpose. The walls, freshly painted in calming blues and greens, displayed framed photographs of healing gardens and natural landscapes. Stewart rushed in behind them, already fielding calls on two phones. "The DA wants to move immediately on the testimonies," he said, covering one receiver. "And we've got 3 more whistleblowers from Memorial Hospital coming forward after seeing the news." Lorraine watched through the window as the media circus grew. More vans pulled up, reporters jockeying for position, their cameras trained on the building. The story was exploding exactly as Jeffrey had predicted. "The documents," Lorraine said, finally releasing her tight grip on the manila envelope. "There are names in here, doctors, nurses, administrators, people who tried to stop this before." Jeffrey carefully spread the contents across a conference table. Photographs spilled out. Clandestine meetings in parking garages, handshakes in private clubs, surveillance shots of people who had since disappeared from the medical community. Each image told a story of corruption, of choices made in shadows. "Some of these people," Jeffrey said, pointing to a group photo dated 3 years ago, "they reached out to me, but they were silenced before we could build a case. Transfers, licensing issues, sudden resignations." Lorraine recognized a face in the corner of the photo, Dr. Sarah Martinez, a promising surgeon who had mysteriously left medicine 2 years ago. Now she understood why. Stewart ended his calls and joined them at the table. "Police are searching Matthew's home and office. They've already found offshore account records and more documentation." He was sloppy at the end, scared. "He should be," Lorraine said. thinking of all the patients who had suffered, all the careers destroyed to protect this network of corruption. They all should be. Jeffrey began organizing the documents into evidence folders, his movements precise and methodical. Matthews was right about one thing. These people are powerful. The fight isn't over. But now we have proof, Lorraine said, and witnesses ready to come forward. Through the window, she could see more police arriving, setting up barriers to control the growing media presence. The story was taking on a life of its own, growing beyond what any of them could control. Stewart's phone buzzed again. The First Hospital Board is calling an emergency meeting. They're already trying to distance themselves from Matthews. Let them run, Jeffrey said, a determined gleam in his eye. Every move they make now only proves their involvement. Lorraine picked up one of the photographs. A group of hospital administrators at a private club, their faces flushed with wine and success, unaware they were being photographed. Among them was Dr. Matthews, younger and more arrogant, raising a glass in triumph. We'll need to protect them, she said, thinking of the new whistleblowers. Give them a safe place to heal. Jeffrey smiled, gesturing to the newly furnished clinic around them. That's exactly why we're here. He walked to the front doors, where the clinic's name was elegantly etched in the glass. Healing Healers Center for Medical Professional Recovery.